Well, we're continuing to go very, very slowly. These are talks on mysticism in Shakespeare, probably more mysticism than Shakespeare. And this is our second thematic series. The first one was on a nature cycle and a parallel spiritual cycle, and it was called The Cycles of Christ and Persephone. This series is called Magic, Black and White, and the first play that we treated was Macbeth and the topic of black magic. And now we are in The Tempest and trying to work on white magic, but first we have to get through the running commentary on the play, which is going a little bit slowly. When we left off last time, we left off in an awkward place. We read from the beginning of Act 4, which is only one scene long, and we read down to line 163, which is right after the end of the mystery pageant. However, what happened is we didn't talk about the mystery pageant, or at least we hadn't finished it, so this is sort of like part 2 of last time. I'm not going for any more of those 2-hour talks, at least not like last week. We got as far last time as discussing Iris as the rainbow goddess and as one of the messengers of the gods and goddesses, Hermes being the other prime divine messenger. There were other human and other kinds of messengers. After Iris makes her introduction, the goddesses enter. And the goddesses that come in are Juno and Ceres, who are respectively Hera and Demeter in Greek mythology. Ceres, or Demeter, was an earth goddess, goddess of the harvest, and she was a grain goddess. It is from Ceres that we get our word cereal. And as Demeter in Greece, she was the patroness of the Eleusinian mysteries. But after the Romans conquered the Greeks, they were so impressed by the Eleusinian mysteries that they continued and they participated. It was a great honor to participate in the Eleusinian mysteries, and it is from that participation that our word ceremony comes from. Juno, like Hera of the Greeks, or Fricka of the Norse, was the goddess of matrimony. Our month, June, is named after Juno, and it still is prime time for marriages. It's surprising how much of our culture, whether we know it or not, that we practice, is pagan. All right, it's the two of them together are apt for a ceremonial, and a ceremonial that's supposed to be fruitful and to produce a binding marriage. Ceres enters first, and then Juno. They give their blessings to the union first, and Juno, who is the Queen of Heaven, is given precedence, and she speaks first and gives her blessings, and then chiming in right after her in a compound speech, Ceres comes in. They each give gifts, and Juno gives gifts that are noble, like honor and long life and good reputation and things like that, whereas the gifts of Ceres are much more expectable. They're earthly things like prosperity and fertility and good harvests and things like that. Now, the reaction of Ferdinand to all of this is very, very interesting, and it's informative for us because we are mystical aspirants, and there are things for us to keep in mind by watching Ferdinand. What happens is what is similar to what happens to Peter, James, and John on the Mount of Transfiguration with Christ. They wanted to stay in the mountain forever. And Ferdinand wants to stay in this ecstatic state of seeing the goddesses forever. In the spiritual path, or along the spiritual path, the greatest trials are usually the trials of success, because they're much more difficult. In failure, we are at least humiliated or humbled, and we don't think too much of ourselves. We're keenly aware of our inadequacies, and we know what we have to do next if we're going to get somewhere. We're less likely to have those grandiose illusions about ourselves and our abilities. In success, we're very apt to think that our part in the experience of success is probably greater than it really is. This happens in a lot of things in life. Performers get a stage high. They get a stage high because the audience is loving them, and the audience gives them everything that they have. And the audience projects things from their own inner consciousness, very often unconsciously. Like you listen to rock stars, there are people that are screaming, and they're screaming and they don't even realize that those are something like primal screams of desires and things like that that they don't normally express in their lives. When a performer is on stage, they're empowered. They're empowered by the audience. They're empowered by the energy that is given to them by the audience. And they can reach the levels that are beyond their normal capacity. So much is the joy of such a state that they don't want to return to their humdrum daily life. So what do? They take drugs, or they have ego-boosting affairs, or something like that. Anything to give them an elevated or a pseudo-elevated state. Of course, all of these things are self-destructive. It seems that any time we try to treat ourselves, it ends up being something self-destructive. One wonders whether a lot of the treats that we give to ourselves that actually bring us down, whether they aren't part of an unconscious self-punishment. In the case of the performer, an unconscious self-punishment for their vanity. Beside being arbitrary and self-indulgent and leading to all kinds of wanton behavior, the egoistic conceit that is with that desire to stay high is actually inhibitory from reaching the high state or keeping the high state. We've all seen performers who can't get anywhere because they're so into themselves that they put a shield around themselves, and that shield of vanity is a inhibition to reaching a higher inner state. With egoism, there's always a tendency to care more about self instead of others or what is our duty. Lovers forget themselves. They become self-forgetting, and they see things in the people that they love that aren't normally seen because they aren't self-preoccupied, and they care about something and they can see because, they don't have that same kind of ego shield around them. When our attention is deflected by even the least little shield of egoism, it's very difficult to penetrate into inner perception or into the inner meaning of anything. So sometimes we are like Ferdinand. We're in love with the experience, or we're in love with our idea of ourselves in the experience, and we just don't accept it as it is. We want to stay there. Now, this isn't really an indictment of Ferdinand, or it isn't even really an indictment of ourselves. Because when things are pleasant, I think there is some natural reaction to want to continue to experience something that is pleasant, especially if it approaches ecstasy. Ferdinand is like us. He's probably a little further along. I'm not having pageants of the gods every day. But we're all just beginners. And we're beginners that are just beginning to come out of a fallen egoistic state. So we can't really be down on Ferdinand. The experiences are wondrous and overwhelming, at least emotionally overwhelming. And they demand so much of us to give to the experience, it's not surprising that we might want to become indulgent about that. So after looking at that and realizing that in appreciating or loving the Shakespeare lines, it's possible that our conceit of ourselves studying Shakespeare, or double conceit of studying Shakespeare and mysticism, might be such that we might not even be penetrating what we're reading. So let's go back and look at the same thing we've just looked at all over again. Let's look at the stage direction. This is one of those cases that the details of the setting are very important. In this case, Ceres walks onto stage, but Juno is let down from the heavens. Now, in Shakespeare's time, that was quite a thing to do. And it's not just theatrics. I don't think Shakespeare does things just for the glory of the theatrics of everything. What it seems to be is that this detail of the settings says that this is not just an earthly marriage of Ferdinand and Miranda. It is a marriage of heaven and earth. Hera was the queen of heaven. Demeter was the queen of earth. And that fact is made very much, that fact is brought to our attention by the way they each enter. The wedding of heaven and earth is the wedding of spirit and matter. And it occurs when a focus, self-conscious focus of the universal spirit, can work through its material vehicles and see into the outer world. And it occurs when the material personality, which is a reflection, the lower self, becomes aware of its position relative to the divine nature, the true self with a capital S, the God within. And it occurs when that God within, the focus of the universal spirit, is keenly and completely aware of itself in all of its divinity. Now, this is all a matter of degree. Everything in initiation is by degrees. Right now, we do see into the external world, and we do so self-consciously. At least the external world of the dense physical plane. Right now, we know that there is something divine in us, even though we are most commonly distracted into our counterfeit self, into our lower ego nature. But right now, we see through a glass darkly, or we see through a glass dimly. It's not clear. When we willingly pass through the labors of love, the service, the experiences that grind away the layers of egoism in us, and the illusion that is attendant to them, and the scales over our own eyes, so to speak. And when in those deeds we have reaped the soul material from those experiences, and it becomes a power in us, this is exactly what Ferdinand has done, and he's done it with a most pleasant and positive disposition. When we do all of those things, we will see also. We will be ready for the alchemical marriage. When that is the case, we won't look idly in the world. Right now, we are spiritually lazy. Sometimes we appreciate the beauty that is around us. Sometimes we see the needs that are around us. But most often, we're semi-inward, not in a spiritual way, but in our little psychic cave, and not really looking with vigor. We're not working when we look into the world. When we do truly look into the world, we'll see meaning. We'll see creative opportunity. And we'll see beauty. Of course, we'll see need. We'll see ugliness also. But every time we look, we'll be seeing something. We won't be distracted. We won't be absent-minded. Similarly, there will be no doubt in us with regard to our divinity. We will be awed into humility, and we will accept our divinity as a duty. And we'll accept the destiny that goes along with that. We'll see ourselves truly as divine, but relative to the divine, which keeps us in a perpetual state of awe and humility. And we won't be puppets anymore. We won't be led around willy-nilly by the nose by the ego nature. Even after the first stage of the alchemical marriage, there will be even deeper degrees of awakening. This is just the wedding, you know. The marriage comes afterwards, and it's a long haul, and it keeps getting better and better. Now, if we look at this in this way, there's something terribly ironic. Because if we look at the pageant and scrutinize everything that the goddesses say in their duet, there's not a whole lot to it. In fact, it's reasonably shallow. It almost sounds like platitudes, nice things that the goddesses are saying. Compare it to deeper statements in other plays, or even deeper statements in this play. The things that the goddesses say in the pageant aren't very much. Now, we could raise the red herring and say, well, maybe there's something encrypted in there. We can always say that, but that isn't very appealing to me. Even the language doesn't lend itself to having encrypted meaning in it. The thing that's really ironic about it is, if you talk to the person on the street and you talk about initiation, or if you talk to somebody that belongs to a brotherhood or a service organization and you talk about initiation, that's exactly what they think it is. They think it's a ceremony. They think it's a pretty play and nothing more than that. Very, very ironic. My own feeling on it is that Shakespeare may be toying with us here, but there may be something else. What I think is going on here is not just a pretty show for the people in the middle of the play, not just a pageant, not just a ceremony. I think that the whole business is humility and respect on the part of Shakespeare. After writing, this is his last play most likely, and after writing all of these plays and basically setting the stamp for the entire English language and saying so many profound things about so many subjects, he had to have known his capacity. He must have known his capacity as a thinker, as a poet, as a writer. But that doesn't mean he's cocky or self-assured. Probably in his humility, his judgment, and his reverence, he realized that there are things that you don't dare to verbalize. Things that are ineffable. For me, it recalls that scene in A Winter's Tale when they're talking about the reunion of Leontes and his wife after she has been away for years, hidden away. That scene isn't shown completely. The whole reunion isn't shown completely. It's told secondhand. Because nobody could act that out well enough. Even when you live through something like that, there's nothing you can say because it's so much that you're left dumbfounded. The feelings are so strong. And you can do a better job of conveying those feelings by doing it secondhand. So I think something like that is going on. If Shakespeare is indeed a mystical writer, his writings are subject to the things that occur in all mystical writing. And in all mystical writing, the omissions, what is not said, but what is hinted at or pointed to, the things that are invisible, the things that are ineffable, are more important very often than what is said. That follows along the principle. There's a whole section in the Tao Te Ching that has roughly the idea. I'll quote one line from memory. It may not be exact, but it says, "It is from the empty hub of the wheel that the wheel derives its use." And similarly, what is not said is where is more important, or where the use of everything that is said comes from. And something like that is what I think is going on here. Before we move on, this is still part 2 of the last one. Before we move on, let's look at one more issue, and that is the issue of gender. In this play, there is a dearth of feminine characters. Until this passage, there has only been Miranda. Fortunately, she is so fresh and so pure and so positive that she's almost enough to make up for everybody else. Now, earlier in this talk and in previous talks, we've suggested that Ferdinand in one way represents the individual who has advanced to the point of being ready for initiation. According to this interpretation, Miranda represents the higher self, the spiritual individuality of that same being. That individuality is not really fully awakened self-consciously. So Miranda is just as much of a virgin as Ferdinand is a virgin. That is the origin of all the mystique that surrounds virginity. So many of the things in life that we have around us really do have meanings, but the meanings are all found in the spiritual, and they have only low-grade or lower undertones in other things. Because the higher self is clothed in the oppositely polarized etheric body, it appears to Ferdinand as a female. Even the dweller in the threshold appears to a male as a female for the same reason. Now that's the beginning of an explanation for Miranda, but it doesn't in the least begin to explain why the goddesses are in charge of the alchemical wedding, the wedding of heaven and earth. I think that Shakespeare may be getting at something else here. And I'm inclined to think that Shakespeare is driving at something else about the cosmic feminine. I'm not certain of it, but it's a topic worth going into whether Shakespeare meant it or not. To my knowledge, that notion of the spiritual feminine is best expressed in the mythology and the mysticism of India. In the mythology of India, the gods are pretty much do-nothings as far as cosmological activity is concerned. They bash the heads of high and mighty demons, and they bash heads on the sorcerous human upstarts, but beyond that they don't do a lot except have children. It's not quite true as far as Brahma is concerned, because Brahma Prajapati does start the whole creation going. He gets several gangs of Rudras around him and gets things going, but after that he becomes pretty much of an obscure background figure. In Indian mythology, it is the feminine counterparts of the gods that get things done. The feminine is not just doing menial work like we picture secretaries doing in our workforce. It is, to them, the nature of the goddesses that the goddesses do. The goddesses effect. They bring things about. Now, it's possible that this philosophy is an abstraction from human reproductivity and child-rearing. The male doesn't have a big part usually in that. He plants the seed, but all the gestatory work, and most of the nesting, and the nurture, and the teaching and everything else in child-rearing is done by the female. It is her nature to do that. Now, before we get into trouble, anytime we touch a subject like this, we have to differentiate between the cosmic feminine and those that are incarnated in female bodies in this incarnation. If we don't, we're going to run into all kinds of problems as far as that is concerned. We're only too prone to identify with our bodies, with our gender, with our race, or whatever. And when we identify with anything that weakens, it drains our true selfhood. Our whole personality or the whole character altogether is weakened by the process of identification in almost all cases. It's sort of a selling of ourself with what goes with identification. So we're not talking, when we're talking about females and the feminine, we're talking about it in an abstract sense, and we're certainly not denying people that are born in feminine bodies now, or us as males that were females in other lives, but we're talking about a principle. In any case, I tend to think it's the other way around. That this philosophy is not an abstraction from human reproductive activities on the physical plane, but that human reproductive activities are a deduction from the universal idea or from the universal principle of the feminine. In astrology, the negative signs are sometimes called feminine signs, and they are portrayed as being receptive, sometimes even passive. They're associated with the passive elements that don't activate. But you have to be very careful about the term passive. Because it only relates to a state of matter when you're talking about the elements. The relative states of being on the spirit-matter pole. The receptivity is never nullified on any level. And it is that receptivity that I think is part of the activity empowering character of femininity. There are similar ideas about how the spiritual feminine works in the West, but they're stated in different ways. In mystic Christianity, the first principle, the Brahma principle, is manifest in will. And it is personified in a being called the Father. The second principle is feminine. And it is manifest in imagination. And it is personified in a strange way. Sometimes it is called the Word. Sometimes it is the begotten alone Son, which is unusual because the principle really is feminine. The Father is always invisible and seemingly inert or inactive, though the reality of it is that it is constantly holding or manifesting will that is indomitable and that is seamless. The cosmic feminine is manifest in pure light, the light that represents the power of the will. And that representation is in the brilliance or luminosity of the light. This is also weird because it is out of the Word that light is made manifest. At any rate, everything else comes into being as a result of this will and this imagination, this pure imagination. Now the will and the imagination, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, are so close, they're inseparable. Inseparable even in terms of activity. The way we experience things is in a hierarchical, a vertical, that the will comes first and then comes the Word. But in the eternal, it isn't that way. The eternal is timeless. And so the function of will and imagination are not in a linear sequence in time. They are present in the now. At the same time, you might say, but that again brings in time. So it's difficult to determine whether the will informs and impresses the imagination or whether the imagination draws out and gives light to the intent of the will. In the eternal, they're probably both present or both true statements. If it's anything like on the horizontal, the relationship between those of us in male bodies and those of us in female bodies should have that same kind of equality. And some people do on a very low level in sexual union or in some kind of spiritual intercourse do experience that wholeness and that unity, so that it's hard telling who wants what. It is that same kind of closeness. But in either case, in the linear cosmogony, everything comes to be through the feminine, the unimagining imagination. The actuality, the definite concepts, or the imaginings, they come with the third. I guess that's about all I can conceive of with regard to Shakespeare's use of the feminine. Perhaps there was something more to it. Perhaps there was something different. Perhaps they had a theatrical union and he had to have so many females in a play, and so he put the goddesses in there, but I don't see it that way. There's one or two little things yet, but then we'll get back to the play. Throughout my life in aspiring, I've often had my nastiest thoughts juxtaposed immediately with my best and most beautiful thoughts. It is as though the Spirit wants to keep some kind of equilibrium in the psyche, and rather than having too many miracles or too many spiritual blessings, or with its newfound strength, the Spirit calls up some of the unconscious sinful elements of our beings so that we can deal with them. It's something like that old maxim, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Of course, the shadow doesn't always have to be sinful. Someday, when we are purified and our whole beings, it will just be a congealment of the manifest or the manifestation of the unknown that will be the shadow. If we're sincere in our desire to serve, we can't abide in heaven forever. Only long enough to get the wisdom and the inspiration to do the work at hand. And so right in the middle of all of this, Prospero, the nymphs or the reapers are there, and they're talking about the reaping of soul material, and the nymphs are there dancing with them, and they are the receptors of the soul material, and they're right in the middle of their dance, and Prospero realizes he has to deal with the nefarious plot of Caliban and the drunks, because they're there now. So he stops the pageant right in the middle of it. Now that might seem psychologically brutal. It might seem shocking. Something like the psychological equivalent of coitus interruptus. Actually, it is probably not so. It's pleasant to gradually ascend to heightened states of consciousness and to be let down easily, but it isn't necessary. When we become strong enough, we should be able to adapt and shift gears immediately, within an instant. Of course, we don't always do that for the sake of other people who can't handle it, but that should be what we become like. In any case, that's what Prospero does, because that is what is called for. So now we'll go back to reading the rest of the scene. We go down to line 164. What we have to say for tonight is almost nothing. It was all last time. All right, what do we need? We need an Ariel, we need a Prospero, we need a Caliban, a Stefano, and a Trinculo. Did you want to be a Stefano or a Trinculo?
Whatever's called for.
All right, who wants to be Ariel? Millie, you're sprightly. Why don't you be Ariel? Who wants to be Prospero? Who has a book? Oh, we got copies here. My goodness. Good. I got to get some over here. I know Jerry is eager to participate, so. Anybody want to be Prospero? All right, Paul will be Prospero. Caliban? Who wants to be Caliban? Good. Tim will be Caliban. Stefano? Roz, which one? You want to be Stefano or Trinculo?
It doesn't matter.
You can be Stefano. Want to be Trinculo? Bob will be Trinculo. It's when Ariel comes in, right after the pageant. Prospero says, "Come with our thought." I thank the Ariel, come. Well, not everybody has found the page yet. All right. set to go?
Not yet. It's right there. Page 67. It's very bottom.
All right, Millie, you're up.
All right. Thy thoughts I cleave to. What's thy pleasure?
We must prepare to meet with Caliban.
Nay, my commander, when I present you Paris, I thought and told thee of it, but I feared lest I might anger thee.
Say again? Where didst thou leave these varlets?
I told you, sir, they were red hot with drinking, so full of valor that they smote the air, breathing in their faces, beat the ground for kissing of their feet, yet always bending towards their project. Then I beat my tabard, at which, like unbacked colts, they pricked their ears, advanced their eyelids, lifted up their noses, as they smelled music. So I charmed their ears, that calf-like they my blowing followed, through toothed briars, sharp furzes, pricky gorse, and thorns, which entered their frail shins. At last I left them, in the filthy, mantled pool behind your cell, there dancing up to the chins, that the foul lake, or stunk their sweat.
Their feet.
This was well done, my bird. Thy shape invisible retain thou still. The trumpery in their house, go bring it thither, or thieves.
I go.
A devil, a born devil, on whose nature nurture can never stick, on whom my pains humanely taken, all lost, quite lost. And as with age his body uglier grows, so is my cankers. I would plague them all, even to roaring.
Come, hang them on this line.
Pray you, tread softly. The blind mole may not hear a footfall. We now are near his cell.
Monster, your fairy, which you say is a harmless fairy, has done a little better than play for Jack with us.
Monster, I do smell all horse piss, at which my nose is in great indignation.
So is mine. Do you hear, monster? If I should take a displeasure against you, look you.
Thou wert but a lost monster.
Good, my lord, give me thy favour still. Be patient, for the prize I'll bring thee to shall hoodwink this mischance. Therefore speak softly, all's hushed as midnight yet.
Aye, but to lose our bottles in the pool.
There is not only disgrace and dishonor in that monster, but an infinite loss.
That's more to me than my wedding. Yet this is your harmless fairy, monster.
I will fetch off my bottle, though I be o'er ears for my labor.
Prithee, my king, be quiet. Cease thou here. This is the mouth of the cell. No noise, and enter. Do that good mischief which may make this island thine own forever, and I thy Caliban, for I thy footlicker.
Give me thy hand. I do begin to have bloody thoughts.
O King Stephano, O peer, O worthy Stephano, look what a wardrobe here is for thee.
Let it alone, thou fool, it is but trash.
Oh, monster, we know what belongs to our frippery. O King Stephano,
Put off that gown, Trinculo. By this hand I'll have that gown.
thy grace shall have it.
The drops be damned, this fool. What do you mean to dote thus on such a luggage? Let it alone, and do the murder first. If ye awake from toe to hand, you'll fill our skins with pinches, make us strange stuff.
Be you quiet, monster. Mistress Line, is this my jerkin? Now is the jerkin under the line. Now, jerkin, you are like to lose your hair and prove a bald jerkin.
Do, we steal by line and level, and slike your grace.
I thank thee for that jest. Here's a garment for it, which shall not go unrewarded while I am king of this country. Steal by line and level is an excellent pass of pate. There's another garment for it.
Monster, come, put some line upon your fingers, and away with the rest.
I will have none on't. We shall lose our time. and all be turned to barnacles of apes with foreheads boneless low.
Monster, lay to your fingers. Help to bear this away where my hogshead of wine is, or I'll turn you out of my kingdom. Go to, carry this.
And this.
Aye, and this.
Hey, mountain, hey!
There you go.
There it goes, silver.
Fury, fury, there, tyrant there, hark, hark. Go charge my goblins that they grind their joints, with dry convulsions shorten up their sinews, with aged cramps, and more at pitch spots make them, than port or cat a mountain.
Hark, they roar.
Let them be hunted soundly. At this hour lies all my mercy, all mine enemies. Shortly shall all my labors end, and thou shalt have the air of freedom. For a little follow and do me service.
Different mystery schools have different takes on hearing and seeing. In Christian mysticism, various mystery schools use appropriate gospels as formulae for initiation for their candidates. The mythical biography of Jesus chosen by the candidate is suitable for that candidate to reach to initiation by living up to the life of Christ. For example, St. Luke's Gospel is by nature for emotional people, people who feel things. The world of feeling or emotion, the desire world, is a realm of light and color. It is the realm of the art of painting. Being of light and color and painting, it is a world for seeing. Therefore, if you look in the very early passages of St. Luke's Gospel, it announces itself early on that this is a gospel for people who see. It says that right away. St. John's Gospel, on the other hand, very early on, is for hearers. It is a deeper gospel. It relates to the world of thought, which is causally antecedent to the desire world because our thoughts can initiate or curb our desires. The world of thought is a world of pitch or of tone. As in our statement, it has the ring of truth. The art for the world of thought is music. A thought or tone-oriented individual is less likely to be subject to optical illusions by listening to inner truth. In fact, there are many less auditory illusions than there are optical illusions. To a hearing-oriented person or a thought-oriented person, a picture may be worth 1,000 words, but the picture is not the meaning. It is the form that holds the meaning. It must still be penetrated, and it must be penetrated to get at the invisible meaning. Now that's one view on hearing and seeing. It's the one that is in Christian mystery schools. In the Eleusinian school in Greece, they had a different view on hearing and seeing. In the Eleusinian school, there were two basic levels of initiation. Initiates of the lesser level were called mystae, singularly mysta. It's where our word mystic or mystery comes from. The mystae were called hearers of the truth. And it was in the context of hearing, which meant they could only hear about it. They couldn't experience it directly. It was sort of like our word hearsay. You have to hear until you can know. The initiates of the higher level were called epopte or epopte. E-P-O-P-T-A-E. A-E. And epopt is still in our language. At least it's in my big dictionary. And epopt is someone who has been instructed into a secret system. Even a spy system with codes and things like that is called an epopt. In the Eleusinian mystery, the epopte were called seers or beholders of the truth. That is, they could see for themselves. Using the term much as we use it, seeing is believing. As we've seen in quite a few of these plays, Shakespeare was quite attuned to Eleusinian mysteries. Since this play has an Italian background and character, Shakespeare seems to have deferred to Ceres rather than Demeter as Lady of the Mysteries, but it still is about the mysteries of Elysius. In this play, Shakespeare seems to be consistent with the Eleusinian notion about seeing and hearing. We have been viewing the characters or groups of characters as representing various stages of human spiritual evolution and as representing human history during which we entered into these stages. Caliban, we have said, represents the animal like humans who were the first to sin. And they live in instinctual consciousness. And the period of time that we are speaking of is in the latter part of the time period called the Lemurian epoch. The drunkards represent something of the late Atlanteans and later, who used alcohol to close off the involuntary clairvoyance so that they could become more grounded and fulfill the destiny by carrying it out by going into the material world as they have. The nobles, with the exception of Gonzalo, represent our ordinary humanity. Earthly, scheming, treacherous, blind. Gonzalo is sort of like a Jupiter figure. You know, like these things are shown astrologically in an ascending tree of the planets. The Moon, Saturn, and Mars are called primitives, and they're sort of like Caliban and Stefano. The nobles are sort of like what are called the social planets, Mercury, Venus, and Sun. And Jupiter is sort of an interloper that takes things to the spiritual level. You have to have all the Jupiterian philosophy and generosity before you're prepared to experience the transcendental or spiritual planets like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Ferdinand represents somebody that is right on the edge of the alchemical marriage, just like we are. And we've said Miranda represents the higher self clothed in the soul body. Through the agency of Prospero, each of these groups of people are being brought into touch with the inner world. But they can only come into touch with it as far as they can experience within their limitation. the time before last time when we talked about the nobles and their experiences with the harpies and the tortures of Tantalus, they saw strange things in the inner world. And they couldn't satisfy their desires. They were, so to speak, the lower epopte. They were seers. It's a distorted notion. In this little vignette, the lowest group, the primitives, are also brought into consciousness with the inner worlds, but they are primarily hearers of the truth. They hear the drumbeat and they hear the dogs. They're sort of like a twisted mistake, but nonetheless the principle of hearing being lower than seeing is carried forth by Shakespeare in this drama. Now we have to be careful when we note things like that. They're curious and interesting, but there are more philosophies about seeing and hearing. And they are very little about the actual esoteric hearing and seeing as spiritual faculties. It's just, we're talking about it. We're sort of misstate. We're talking about it. We're hearing about it in a hearsay way. In the involuntary experiences in the inner world, this vertical distinction between seeing and hearing doesn't always hold true. In fact, it usually doesn't with involuntary things. What I'm trying to say by that is auditory hallucinations are no higher than visual hallucinations or no lower. If we follow the same line of thought and look at Ferdinand both sees and hears, and he's fully conscious of it, and everything is satisfying to him. He doesn't have the unfulfilled hungry desires that the lower kinds of consciousness do. Now there's another thing about illusion that is in this. When this very primitive group experiences the return of their own baseness, it isn't internal. When the nobles experience, there's some degree of internality in that when they have the psychic experience, the clairvoyant experience of the harpies and of the food being served to them and taken away before they can grasp it, they feel inwardly a remorse. And it is called to their mind that they have all taken part in the nastiness toward Prospero a long time ago. But when the primitives experience it, it's totally external and it's extrapersonal. It's like it's coming to them from outside, and it's coming from someone else who is responsible for it. It's not them at all. Even the play gives the impression that Prospero is behind all of this. However, if we look at the characters in groups of characters, in terms of our spiritual constitution, obviously Prospero represents the God within, the manifest God within. If we grant that, it's no stretch at all to say that the God within brings divine experiences of the stinky things we've done and the painful things that we've done in the darkness of ignorance. I'm perfectly willing to submit myself to the God within. In fact, it is perfectly consistent with all the personal experience that I've had of things like this. This notion is also consistent with the characters of our play as representing stages of history. The nobles do experience remorse, and Ferdinand takes whatever is presented to him. When he's given hard work, he takes it and he enjoys it for his love of the Spirit, for his love of Miranda. He has accepted and cleansed and advanced his consciousness. He's in love in the highest sense of the word. Now, while we're on the subject of desire, illusion, and cause and consequence, I have a couple little things, and then we'll call it a night. The point is made very clearly in what we've just read, that as long as the drunks had an object of desire, they were successful. Painfully successful, but successful nonetheless. As long as they kept Miranda and power and everything in mind and listened to the drumming desire leading them on, even though painful, even though noisome, they went through any kind of environment to get there. The function of desire is motivation. But motivation must be toward or away from something, some end, an object or an objective. When the attention is focused on an object, a relationship is set up between subject and object. And that relationship, as long as the subject maintains intent, that relationship brings subject and object together. There may be a rejection or a repulsion afterwards, but at least subject and object are brought together. However, we have to be very clear in our desire. If we are not clear and objective in our desire, other desires will compete for our attention. And they all want satisfaction. They all want gratification. The desire world is densely populated with intense desires of all sorts, even more so than our desire body. But our desire body has quite a few. If you don't think so, just go shopping. You'll find there are a lot of things that you like. Even our spiritual aspiration is rife with desire and desires. There is nothing wrong with desire. It was put there for the function of motivation. Without that motivation, we don't experience things and we don't do things. The problem is when our desires become selfish, or when we get emotionally out of balance and our desires become dominant. Even refined desires and emotions can produce problems. It takes a very keen awareness and a good discipline to work with an elaborate emotional and desire nature. And even more to deal with the desire world at large. The primitives have strong base desires, especially Caliban. Caliban sees through the ruse of the clothes, not only because he's experienced other things from Prospero, but because he still has some kind of an instinctual cunning. And in that instinctual cunning, he knows what he wants. It isn't the same as a self-conscious desire. But Trinculo and Stefano have more self-consciousness, and they're drunken, and they're not disciplined, and they're not aware of the game. They're not aware of what their desires are doing to them. And the alcohol doesn't make things any better. So as soon as they're exposed to tinsel and spangle, bright shiny things or things to get their attention, they're distracted. And other desires to have pretty adornment, take over. Prospero didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to do anything magical. All he had to do is put some shiny clothes off there, and they were taken off. And as soon as they were taken off, they were subject to their own inner things. The last little thing is a redux of something we've mentioned before, and that is when one has an experience of the desire world more objectively than we have normally in our subjective, uncontrolled experience of desire, things become reversed. We've mentioned how things that we attack us in our dreams, because we're looking with a more objective thing and we're seeing what kinds of desires are coming out of us. In this case, the primitives were stalking Prospero. They were stalking in the waking state. And as soon as they are exposed to the inner worlds and they have a little bit of first-hand experience, they are the ones that are hounded. They're hounded by their own desires. And that's as far as we got tonight. And next time we'll try to do all of Act 5, but I won't make any promises. Not tons of questions? Thank you, guys.